Could you talk us through your sword collection?
Yes.
Because, of course, he has a sword collection.
The only reason I have a sword collection is because of the movies I've done where I had a sword. The first sword I ever had was in The Three Musketeers. And I was too young in the business to ask for it when the movie finished. And then the next movie I did was with a sword was The Hobbit.
Anyone watch that one? Anyone out there?
Anyone watched The Hobbit before?
Yeah, I thought as much.
I just saw one of the dwarfs in the green room. Yes, actually, he's one of the he's here. He's not really a dwarf. He's an actor that played one of the dwarves in The Hobbit.
There's Mr. McTavish.
Mr. McTavish.
Oh.
Graham McTavish is here. Not talking about The Hobbit.
No.
Anyway, so I have the sword that Bard the Bowman uses in the Battle of the Five Armies. It's his ancestor's sword, Girian's sword, who I also played. And then I have Dracula's sword, which is the most beautiful. And then I thought, well, the sword I don't have is the Three Musketeers. So I went online, and it took me about 7 years to find the sword. And it was in a prop auction somewhere in Germany. And I bid it for it, and I bought it for 700 quid.
Let's dig into the book here, because where did this begin? Like, it must have been a bit of a head trip looking back on your life, seeing how you've got here. You know, I gave you all of those lists of massive titles you've been in. How odd was it for you looking back on your youth and then this whirlwind career you've been on?
Well, it's a very strange thing to do. I mean, I didn't think I would ever write a memoir. I'm only 45. And so I had to think about what it was that this book was going to do. What was the reason, what's the point for this book? And the reason really was most people, including lots of people here, would know me from my movies, which is why my introduction is all about my movies. But of course, there's a human being here that didn't start as Bard the Bowman or Dracula. Like, I came from a very small village in South Wales, and I had a very unusual upbringing. I was in a very religious household. I came out very young. I left home very young. I struggled. I went through some really crazy stuff, which is quite painful to relive through the book. But the story is about hope. It's my journey, and I hope it inspires young people and anyone who reads the book to keep going and to believe in themselves and to be their authentic self and to dream. And I believe if you dream hard enough, things do come true. Maybe not exactly the dream you want, but I think if you really, really are ambitious and strong and be true to yourself, is the only way one can live, I think. So
I imagine this was genuinely, at times, really tough to write.
yeah, I could have done with one of my swords back then. Yeah. Would have been much easier. No, bullying is a horrible thing. And I was bullied really, really badly from as early as I can remember in my school days, all the way through to the day I left school at 16. I left at 16 because I hated it so much and I couldn't bear to be there any longer. So if I hadn't have been bullied, I probably would have done A-level, but I just had to leave. It was just too painful. And bullying can really affect you. You know, it can affect you as an adult in a really bad way. It can traumatize you, and it can stunt your ambition and your voice and your dreams and your confidence. And so, yeah, it was a hard thing to get through. I used to just tell myself when I was a kid that this was only temporary. I don't know how at 8 or 9 I knew that, but that's what I used to say to myself, that this unhappiness, these bullies are only temporary, and when I leave school and I leave home and I get a job, I'll find new friends and I'll do something different with my life. What I did with my life was certainly not the plan, and for any Hobbit fans out there, you'll see that is a slight play on the title of the book, My Unexpected Journey, because The Hobbit was such a humongous part of my life. It was a huge moment. It was a big, big movie for me to be a part of. And I just thought it was a nice little twist on my connection to that movie. And my journey was very unexpected.
You got the gig in The Hobbit off of one take because Peter Jackson said, actually, he's a guy I want. Let's have him. That must have been a nice lump in confidence.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was, I'd gone on tape with a casting director in London, and I didn't hear anything back for almost 18 months. 18 months, a year and a half. I'd completely forgotten about The Hobbit. I'd forgotten about anything to do with The Hobbit. And then out of the blue, a phone call came through my agent saying that Peter Jackson and Fran and Philippa wanted to fly me to New Zealand to screen test for this character that's about to start filming in a couple of months in The Hobbit. And I'm like, what, that thing I did like a year and a half ago? They're like, yeah. And unfortunately, I couldn't go because I was about to do a movie in New Orleans. And so one of the biggest opportunities in my career so far at that point, I had to say no to, knowing full well that I was going to lose the opportunity to screen test for this giant film. So I got on the plane to do my horror film in New Orleans. And I got off the plane, turned my phone on, and there was all these text messages coming through. They called Peter and Fran and Philippa and they said, we're so sorry, but Luke can't come. He's contracted. And they said, okay, let us think about it. And then Peter called back and said, you know what? We're going to give him the job just from that one audition. So it was an amazing moment.
Yeah. Do you have any big set pieces from The Fast and the Furious that you can think of where you go, only on a Fast and the Furious movie would this be happening?
Oh, yeah. I mean, firstly, you know, if you put me next to Dwayne Johnson, it's like there's no competition. And then, you know, there's a fight sequence between Owen Shaw, Luke Hobbs, Dwayne Johnson, and Vin Diesel, Dom Toretto on this Antonov aeroplane, a big carrier, a Russian carrier plane, cargo plane, which didn't seem to take off from the runway for about 18 miles.
You remember that, right?
It's the world record for the longest takeoff in film history. You know, and the whole thing was on a gimbal, so it shook and then it tilted. And then a car fell out of the back while we were all doing this fight sequence. And then there was cables so people could fly and be thrown back into boxes, you know, all within this contained aeroplane, which never seemed to take off.
About the fans of it, do you have a memorable fan interaction that springs to mind? Or you've had somebody come up to you and maybe quote one of your movies or start singing at you?
I remember being in a taxi in London, and as quite often the taxi driver looks in the mirror and he's like, are you? And I'm like, who am I? Get it right and you'll maybe win a prize. And he said, you were in the Three Musketeers. And I was like, yeah, I was. And then he went quiet. He's like, wow, Aramis, right? I said, yeah, I was. And then he started to recite my lines to me. And I was like, well, what's that? And he was like, these are your lines. This is what you said in the film. And he recited swathes of my dialogue back to me. This movie is like 14 years old. I think I'd met the biggest fan of the Three Musketeers, and he was driving my Uber in London. And it was a magical moment. It made me very happy, and it touched me to the impression that this character had on this guy. It was very cool.
And am I right in thinking that Robin Hood was your first time on a movie set full stop?
Yep.
And that's Russell Crowe, Kate Blanchett.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say trial by fire, but I bet you were wide-eyed the whole time.
Yeah, I had one line. It was, won't say his name, demands an audience with the sheriff. And I was the sheriff of Nottingham's henchman. And the sheriff of Nottingham was Matthew McFadden, who 3 or 4 years later was one of the Three Musketeers alongside my character, which is a very mad thing. But yeah, I remember doing like 3 weeks horse training. And all I had was one line, but they liked me being next to the Sheriff of Nottingham, so they just kept asking me to come back. And I was like, absolutely, I'll come back. And it was amazing. That's where I learned to ride a horse for the first time. And I love horses now. I used to be terrified of them. And yeah, that was the first time I was on a film set. And such a crazy, crazy thing because it was huge. Russell had 4 trailers. I remember they used to say he had these 4 big trailers in a square, and they used to call it Russell Square.
Tell us the story of when you first met Emma Thompson on the set of, wait for it, Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, so anybody who knows Clash of the Titans knows that Emma Thompson was not in Clash of the Titans. So we were shooting it in Shepperton Studios, and it was a Mount Olympus scene, and all the gods were on their thrones around this big world. It was a huge set, as big as this auditorium. And next door in Studio 10, they were shooting Nanny McPhee. Very different story, very different characters. But what we didn't know was that Emma Thompson was very old friends of Liam Neeson, who was playing Zeus. I was his son, Apollo, and we were on thrones close to each other. And one day, just before we broke for lunch, Nanny McPhee turns up on our set in full Nanny McPhee costume and walked across Mount Olympus and walked up to Zeus's throne and sat on his lap. Nanny McPhee sat on Zeus's lap. It was a very, very surreal moment, and made me remember like how magical this world of make-believe and making movies is. You know, one studio is making Nanny McPhee, and the other one is making Clash of the Titans, and there's just a brick wall between us.